And we're live.
Hell yeah.
It's a little bit of time on it. Oh yeah, like overlay doesn't look all that bad right there. The way you've got it.
Yeah, I figured that's the only way I can make it work.
Hell yeah, looks good.
Audio's coming
Fucking-
through here. All right, I think we're good.
Oh wait, let me just change the battery on my headset real quick.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm gonna plug mine too. Actually, it's yelling at me. All right. Well, today is the day talking about for a long time. Talking about the Fundamental Latter-day Saints, FLDS.
Can you explain your relationship to Rob? I guess.
Well, I want to keep some.
You still hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah.
you fine.
Okay.
I want to keep sun anonymity. don't
Okay,
know
I hear that.
English words, but friend of a friend,
Friend of a friend. Hell yeah.
friend's boyfriend has some ties to the FLDS religion,
That's
and we're excited to have him here today.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming
Rob.
on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fucking thank you. Dude, how old were you? Actually, you're not still a part of the FLDS church, are you?
Nope.
Okay, didn't want to.
No,
disrespectful.
it's. I'll just like get it straight from the beginning. I'm not associated with it. It's not really a sensitive subject for me. So any questions whatsoever, just fire away. So
That makes sense.
Right.
How do you feel about it? Are you resentful towards it?
No, not really. I think it's just a part of growing up, and I think every human has a past, and that was part of my past. So
All right.
It's well
Well,
put.
Well, maybe let's touch on some things first. Basically, our general understanding of the topic. So, there were a lot of different subsections that broke off after Brigham Young died. A lot of people didn't like the way that the religion was taken. So, there's a lot of different groups that have broken off. From my understanding, you're from the Rulon Jeffs, Warren Jeffs commune.
correct. That group, yep. Yeah.
So it's a relatively big community, right? It's got
Absolutely,
hundreds
yeah.
of thousands of people. Like there's a
Well, I don't know if it'd be 100,000, but it's definitely. I think at its peak, it was definitely over 10,000 followers.
wow. Okay.
Do you
Maybe
know
I'm
what
just
time?
referring to the general FLDS numbers.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I only know about the Warren Jeffs group.
Okay.
I didn't really associate much with the different FLDS groups. So
Okay.
actually, I just have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
This is my first time on this group. I'm just curious what is the first of all, what's the name of the podcast, and what is it that you mostly address on the podcast?
So podcast name is Cult Beginnings.
Uh-huh.
So we generally talk about a lot of it's our leaving of the LDS religion for the most part.
Okay.
And we generally touch on the estranged, like we'll touch on the supernatural, we'll touch on cult leaders, religious leaders, groups, and kind of try to give people a community to come forward and like share their stories, or like give people the ability to think critically about they've fallen under in the past. And
yeah, that's perfect.
Tools, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So occasionally we'll go into a little bit of the esoteric.
Yeah.
And we just kind of try to break down the cult mindset in a digestible way.
Huh. Interesting, because I kind of had the same process when I left the cult, but yeah. Anyway, continue. Sorry, I was just trying to get clear on that.
Yeah, it's good that we have like kind of equal understanding on where we all stand, so it's not like
Yeah.
Don't want it to feel too sensitive. So you do refer to, it as a cult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's good. I believe the same thing. I think that it's incredibly cult-like behavior. I mean, I generally refer to the LDS religion as cult-like. It abides by most models that you can break down
Right.
terminology for cult-like belief systems. But
I got a question, dude. How old were you when you started processing that something was wrong, that something wasn't meeting your values?
That's a really good question. I think it was about, let's see. I think it initially started. Well, let me back up. There was a subconscious process that went on in my head that I wasn't aware of, but in hindsight, I realized this is where it all kind of started, and it was actually when I was 5 years old, and it was when my dad married his second wife. That's how old I was, and my mom was my dad's first wife, excuse me. And so when my dad married his second wife, I saw that it had a detrimental effect on my mom, and I think that's when I made the subconscious decision at 5 years old that I didn't want to live this lifestyle.
okay,
So,
well, yeah,
That's awesome feedback.
so they're pretty young then. So, were you born into
yeah,
it? Okay, so
yep,
you already had your dad already had the predisposed concept like
yeah.
that. Something
I
related.
was like, well, let's see. I'm not sure where my ancestry started in Mormonism, but I was definitely at least third or fourth generation uh, Mormon.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah, I can track my ancestry back to like Porter Rockwell.
oh, nice.
Joseph Smith's
Yeah,
bodyguards. Yeah.
you're a real
So
gunslinger,
I've got some ties to the
huh?
foundation and all that. My
That's who I'm
great
named
uncle, like
after.
majority of my family is still heavily involved in the church. I've got a great uncle on my mom's side who actually produced the Porter Rockwell autobiography or biography, and then I
Uh-huh.
lived with a friend who is still involved in the church, whose father actually wrote that biography. So, got a lot of interesting ties to the church.
Mm-hmm.
What's your relationship to the
Mainstream Mormon or
yeah,
LDS?
just LDS? I'm trying to find
Just LDS,
yeah,
yeah.
just LDS.
Yeah, I usually call it mainstream just because
Mainstream.
it's,
Okay.
yeah. Um, I think for a number of years there, I was actually kind of bitter, I guess you could say, towards any and all organized religion. So that, and particularly Mormonism, just because, you know, when I was growing up, there's let's see, I think it's in the Doctrine and Covenants where they talk about the great abominable church, and my understanding is that the LDS claimed that it's the Catholic Church, and then in the FLDS we claimed that it was the mainstream
Yeah.
Mormon Church, and so anyway, all that stuff's kind of subject to interpretation, but um, I I think for a number of years there I was bitter towards it, but I think it's just because I was coming to terms with the fact that everything that I was raised to believe was it was contradicting reality, you know,
That'll do it.
and and so and so when I met people who were in the LDS church and how they had, you know, all this unquestioning belief in the faith, then it kind of made me angry because they were so ignorant to the way the world is, you know.
Yeah.
But now, you know, now my path has kind of gone more towards Eastern philosophy and into like Hinduism and Buddhism. I if I was biased, I would definitely say I'm Buddhist, but I know that Buddhism has its own ideology and it can become a cult in and of itself. So, but anyway, that's kind of the path I've gone. And who's to say that somebody has gone on a similar path into Mormonism? I think everybody's gone through a process of discovery, and some people end up in Mormonism and they have a unquestioning faith in the religion, So I can't really blame anybody for believing what they believe. So
Yeah, and that's something we like to talk on a lot. Is it's a lot of these any belief is very like it's persuasive. People believe these things for a reason.
right,
Who's to say
yeah,
like what's necessarily right and wrong? But like we just want to make sure everybody's going into whatever they choose to believe with the mindset that you're thinking critically of the things. Like you're able to abide by principles that aren't going to lead you to harm others or harm yourself or put yourself in
right,
dangerous
yeah,
situations like that. That's why we generally refer to like the bite model, which is the model that refers to systematic abuse in potentially religion or any form of um, systems of ideology that might lead somebody to basically be indoctrinated in some form of mind control where they're not able
right,
to look outside towards like critical information, which kind of makes me want to touch on Birdie's question here in chat. She was asking, or she stated, to her understanding, these communities don't have much involvement with the outside world. So when you left, was there anything that surprised you in a good or bad way about like the outside, or um, how
Does
much
that statement
exposure
ring
did you
true to
have?
you too?
Yeah, like how much exposure did you have like within the like when you were in the community?
okay. So rephrase that question.
So before you left, did you
Uh-huh.
have a lot of resources that allowed you to kind of have an understanding what the outside
Oh
world is
yeah,
like?
definitely, yeah.
You had the ability to do that. Okay.
Yeah, so actually, yeah, so there's a point here, and we'll come back to it. I'm sure we'll cross it again. But so for the FLDS, it's a very male-dominated society,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
so for me, I had a lot more freedom than, say, the women,
Okay.
and so when I was on my way out of the cult, then I was working for this construction company who would travel all over the state, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. And so I was exposed to the outside world, and I'd worked with people who weren't part of our religion. And so I was somewhat familiar with the outside world, and
Okay.
leaving the cult wasn't that big of a shock for me, particularly because Utah is a very LDS dominated state. And
Yeah.
so
So.
there's not that much of a culture shock going from hardcore Mormonism to mild form of Mormonism,
Yeah.
you know? So anyway,
But did you ever get feedback from anyone while still part of the religion, or had you just made the connections yourself?
feedback, you mean as far as just like people talking down to me or people just questioning?
Probably both. Any kind. As a Mormon, I got
Um,
a lot of feedback from people telling me I was in a
yeah.
cult.
Oh,
Did you say
yeah.
that to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I don't remember a lot of that. I do remember we'd get a lot of strange looks just because in the Warren Jeffs group, they have a particular dress code, and that's they definitely have their long underwear, and we called it long underwear, but I understand the Mormons call it temple garments
Or magic underwear is what
and magic
we
underwear.
typically refer to it as. Yeah.
Actually, I call them Jesus jammies now,
Yeah.
but
Jesus
Jesus jammies, that's great.
but anyways, but yeah, they had the long underwear, and then I wore long sleeve shirts that go down to my wrist, long pants that go down to my ankles, and during the summertime we had that on. And to me, I don't know how I survived it, but in the summertime in southern Utah, it gets extremely hot with that much clothing on. But anyway, that's what I remember. I forgot what the question was now, or where I was going with that. But
people giving you feedback.
Feedback. So it would be in the middle of July and August, and we'd get some really strange stares from people, like in southern Utah, particularly St. George. We'd do work in Las Vegas. We would do work in Salt Lake, all over the place. And I just remember that we were different.
Okay.
We definitely stood out from the crowd. So
yeah, I've come across like I don't know if I'd be able to differentiate like a man in that religion versus like the women, because the women definitely stand out, like what they're wearing,
absolutely,
the
yeah.
hair. It's always like, oh, that they're polygamous or the FLDS or whatever it is, and they are very staunch in like not communicating with people. Like if they're going through the grocery store, it's very much so
Yep.
just sticking very tightly to each other. They will not talk
Yep.
to the cashier.
Yeah.
It felt like it was different being a man growing up in that society.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of their behavior, and maybe it's good to touch on this. They're a very closed society, and they're very guarded when it comes to being in what they would call the Gentile world. So if they go to a Walmart, or Costco, whatever, out anywhere, then they become very guarded. The reason is they believe that they are the only ones who have the truth, and anybody who is not a part of the group is considered an enemy, or they consider being influenced by Satan, whatever. I'm sure you're familiar with all this kind of ideology, and so they don't want to associate with people who are outside of the group, because they think that they could come under the influence of Satan. So
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Birdie asked, I mean, interrupt you. Spencer, do you have something to say? Birdie asked, are you still in touch with anyone from that time in your life?
Not so. My mom is actually still in the cult, I guess you could say, and I'm not sure what the status of the cult is ever since Warren Jeffs has been imprisoned. So I don't really follow it that much, and there's little that I do get to know about other than what's on the news. But my mom's still a part of it, and if she's not a part of it, then I don't know why she's not talking to me. But I've been trying to get a hold of my mom for I don't know, I haven't talked to her in, what is it, 8 or 9 years.
Damn.
Wow.
And so my mom and some of my younger siblings are still associated with it. Other than that, everyone else is pretty much out of it. My dad was actually excommunicated from the FLDS, and I've been in communication with him, and he's come a long way for a guy who was also raised in the church. He's come a long way. Okay. And he still has a lot of beliefs and has a lot of perceptions, but he's not as guarded, or he doesn't put up this guard against the rest of the world. He's come to the reality that the world isn't out to destroy, the church and all that, So
That's good. Healthy relationship with your dad nowadays, or is it?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
That's good.
Which is surprising, because my dad was born in this cult, and he was born in Hilldale, Utah. That's where I was born, and that is, let's see, it's about 30 minutes east of Hurricane, Utah. I don't know if you guys have been down there, but if you're in Zion's National Park and you've fly straight south for 10 miles, you'll fly right over Hilldale, Utah. And it sits right on the border of Utah and Arizona. So my dad grew up there, and that community was founded in like the beginning of the 20th century, like 1912 or something like that, long time ago. And it's still a really small community. But what I'm getting at is that my dad was born in 1956, and he grew up in this very small town in the desert. And my mom grew up in Sandy, Utah with, the rest of the Mormons. And I just find it odd that now she's caught up in this cult and my dad is now more worldly,
Yeah.
It's just an interesting contrast there.
Yeah, so she was not involved in any way before meeting your father. She just...
Not as much. She was more like a mainstream Mormon, and then as she got older, her family that she was raised in got more associated with the polygamists.
Can you speculate on why?
Why?
Do you have any idea why they would want to be attracted to that?
Oh, that's actually pretty simple. So the Mormons used to practice polygamy, and I'm sure you knew that.
Yeah.
And that's just a little history. Back in 1890, the Mormons decided to do away with polygamy, and I think my understanding is the main motivation for that was so that Utah could become a state.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, since that's occurred, then there's still a lot of doctrine, a lot of stuff that's in the Mormon history, and there's a lot of members who question, okay, so why aren't we living this doctrine, or why has it changed, and all this. And so there's some people who are like, well, I think that this group that still practices the fundamental teachings of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young it's a more pure form of my faith, so I'm going to follow them, type of a thing.
That makes sense.
And so
interesting, yeah.
Appreciate that feedback.
When you left, what was that process like?
So when I was in my teens, so around 14, 15, I think it's pretty common for teenagers, kind of the subconscious processes that goes on with teenagers as they're forming their own identity. And so I was questioning, where I was, everything that was going on. Who am I? How do I fit in this world? All this stuff. And it was more of like, I wanted to forge my own path. And so, being that I was exposed to the outside world more than the women, it was a lot easier for me to do that. And so my brother had left the cult like 3 years before I did, or something like that. And he had a house that he was renting with his friends in St. George, Utah. And I was working with the company in Las Vegas. And about a month prior to me officially leaving the cult, my dad had kicked me out of his house because I had movies and music that weren't appropriate.
Nice.
So actually any kind of films they shunned. The only music and the only literature that they allowed was that which was produced by the church, the FLDS church. And that's one of the reasons how a cult perpetuates itself, is through control of the media, of its own media, things like that. So anyway, my dad kicked me out of his house. So on weekends, when the rest of the company that I was working for, which was an FLDS ran company, Even though I was kicked out of my dad's house, I was still working with an FLDS company. And they would go home on weekends. Well, I couldn't go home. And so I went to my brother's house, and I would hang out with my brother. And they didn't like that I would do that because I was associating with apostates. I'm sure you're familiar with the term apostates.
Yeah.
So I was, I was dealing with the devil basically. And it was just a process of, being a teenager, and I had the freedom. I had my own car. I had a job. I had money. I had trade skills, and I was able to get a job, And so it was, I was on a job site doing concrete, and one of the contractors, offered me a job, and I said, sure. And so I went to work for this contractor, who was not a part of the FLDS, and I was like, okay. And after I started working for a company that was not part of the church, then it was kind of the final nail in the coffin of, okay, I'm done with this,
Kind of have some insight on other people that you're constantly being familiarized with that are giving you some.
Yeah, and it was an interesting time because, let's see, so I was, when I had finally made this decision, I was 19 years old. So it was from the time of 14 years old to 19 years old. And it was just this gradual process of, of being a teenager. I had the freedom. I had the trade skills that would allow me to transition out of the cult. And I haven't really been a person that really cares what people think of me. And so my dad was furious with me that for quite a few years that I had turned my back on the priesthood and all this. And so, like, one example is when he kicked me out of his house, he tried to use the reverse psychology on me of like, go ahead, do what you want, if you stay here, you have to abide by the rules. If you don't, you have to leave. It's your choice. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll leave. So I was like, okay, well, I don't. It wasn't that hard of a choice for me to leave. And then when I told him I left, it really pissed him off because he didn't want me to make that choice, even though he did give me the opportunity to make that choice. Well, anyway, so I forgot where I was going with that.
Yeah, you answered the question perfectly, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was kind of a gradual process, and it's something really traumatic would have to happen for that process to occur more suddenly. For me, it was a gradual process. I think people who are in these cults and they experience some kind of trauma, let's say sexual abuse, that can be pretty traumatic, and that can push a person to move out of these cults more rapidly. For me, that wasn't the case. So, anyway.
Makes sense.
Did you ever find yourself regretting leaving or questioning?
Yeah, there was. So when I was kind of out on my own, and my brother, I stayed with my brother down in St. George, and I can't remember what happened. I went I got like another job or something. Let's see, I'm 34 now, so this was over 10 years ago. But anyway, for some reason my brother started really getting me to you're not in this protected shell anymore. You're gonna have to go out on your own. You need to work your ass off and start providing for yourself, because you don't have a society that controls everything for you anymore. Everything's gonna have to be on you now. And so you know, it was a bit of a change for me to adapt to being self-sufficient, because prior to that, I had never had a lease. I had never rented an apartment. You know, I
Yeah.
always lived actually. So there in Hilldale, Utah, and Colorado City, how it worked was the church would buy property from the government, and then they would allow church members to build a house on these lots, and then the church members would pay the church for taxes or something. I can't remember how it worked, but basically all the land was controlled by the church, and that was kind of a cash cow for the church, was the land itself. Well, anyway, so my dad didn't really have a mortgage other than paying the church. And so this whole thing of, you know, paying rent and, you know, covering groceries, you know, taking care of, you know, everyday things was a little bit different for me, because I had a lot of, like, laundry, for example. My mom always did my laundry when I was growing up. You know, it's just one of those things I had to learn how to do. Not a big deal. But anyway, but I particularly remember for at least a year after I had finally made the decision that I was no longer part of this group. I remember waking up just in the early stages of waking up. There's just this incredible anxiety because I felt vulnerable, and
Yeah.
I felt, let's see, yeah, it was vulnerability, and I felt, what is it? It's kind of mixed with like loneliness, because I was raised in a large family, and that whole family, other than the members who had already left, I knew that when I made this decision to leave, that they would no longer want to talk to me. They wouldn't associate with me, all that.
Yeah.
There was just a lot of loneliness and a lot of vulnerability, because I was walking away from everything that was familiar to me. So that's just what I remember when I came out of it. I don't know if I answered your question, but
You did, definitely.
I just remember the emotions that were going on at the time. So
Yeah. What about the existential? Did you experience any existential thoughts, considering how much conditioning you had, believing God existed, or being told God existed in a particular way? Believing Mormonism left me feeling similar to what you just described.
yeah, let's see. Okay, so yeah, I that's a really good question. I you know what? I didn't really think about it that much. I think the way I felt was, you know, why I couldn't understand that I made the decision I made, and if God was going to judge me or punish me for what I did, that kind of behavior from a superior being seemed less human. Like, it didn't seem like that kind of behavior would be coming from a superior being. In other words, why would God judge me for the decision I made? You know?
And especially if he put you there to make decisions like that.
Right. And
Yeah.
to me it was ironic, because I mean, it wasn't until a few years later that I had put all this together, and I had come to a just like this. Sorry. This part's like, it's I'm glad you asked the question, because this is a big part of who I am today. But going back to that, I didn't feel like God was going to be harsh on the decision I made, particularly because of a belief that comes in Mormonism that has kind of stuck with me, is that, and ironically, I remember these words coming from Warren Jeffs, which was, as God is, or as man is, God once was, as God is, man may become. And so I felt like if I'm on this path to become like God or become God, I need to make my own fucking decisions, you know?
Yeah.
And so I felt like I had made my decision. I'm willing to suffer the consequences. If God's angry with me, I'm willing to pay the price. Because the way that the church had gone over the years seemed to be more like hell. And so it was like, well, if these people are going to heaven, then I might as well go to hell, because hell just sounds a lot funner, you know?
Yeah.
Well,
But anyway, but yeah, sorry I got emotional there. It's just it's going in a direction to where I made this realization, and it has to do with God, and we can get to that later. I just wanted to answer the question there.
Yeah.
well, thank you for doing it. Seriously.
Great
Mm-hmm.
insight. I did want to touch on, like, you said it was between the time ages of like 14 to 19, I believe you said, when you like had the skills to leave. How early? Because I know a lot of FLDS companies, they'll start you working real young. I know that
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
Challenger, the O-rings that faulted on the Challenger explosion
Uh-huh.
were built by FLDS companies.
What?
Yeah, actually, yeah,
Possibly built by
I know who that is. Yeah,
Oh wow.
yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. How young did they start you working? How when?
Well, so yeah, they're definitely guilty of child labor.
You'd go as far
They,
as say that?
yeah,
That's
in
interesting.
in hindsight, but it was kind of a gray area back in the day, because the families want to instill a good work ethic in their kids, which is great. I think it's awesome. Now, one thing they did was, when I was growing up, they had what was called Saturday work projects, and all the men would meet Saturday morning, and they would have projects around the town that we would go work on, and this was all labor free. In other words, we weren't compensated for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad did a lot of drywall. And so I remember going around Hilldale and Colorado City. And I don't know if you guys have been there. There's a lot of really large homes, and they're all custom made homes. And these are homes that are practically like hotels. Some of these homes have like 15 bedrooms,
Jesus.
or 20 bedrooms and 10
Big families,
bathrooms.
I guess.
Yeah. So anyway, and we'd spend all day, all of Saturday from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. Doing drywall, or I did a lot of drywall with my dad, and I remember doing that ever since I was like 6 years old.
Wow.
Jeez.
So like, you can probably put a lot of this together now. That's how I had a lot of these trade skills.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I was a teenager, and I had done drywall, I had done framing, I had a lot of construction skills, and I started machining, CNC machining, when I was 16 years old. So,
Wow. Yeah. Well, you seem incredibly well adjusted. I know that schooling in a lot of those communities, they're generally not like public school. It's
right. Actually, it's interesting you say that, because I, ironically, I have never gone to a private school. they did have public schools there, and so I went from, you know, kindergarten up to 8th grade. I didn't go into high school, unfortunately. I really wish I would have, but at the time, and based on what was going on, I ended up going to work rather than going to high school. So
Yeah, makes sense.
pretty common.
Was your school blended FLDS with like nearby towns, or was it primarily like?
No, it was pretty much isolated. There is a community just south of Colorado City that's in Arizona. There's actually 2 communities that are just south of there. One is called Centennial Park, and the other community is called Cane Beds. Well, so Centennial Park was also, they were also FLDS. They were polygamists, but they didn't follow the Jeffs family.
Okay.
So they were a branch off of the FLDS that I grew up in. And that occurred back in the early 80s. So the guy that was before Rulon Jeffs, who was Warren Jeffs' dad, when he passed away and Rulon Jeffs took over the church, then there was another split in the church, and that's pretty common throughout the Mormon history. Is every time a prophet dies or someone dies, then there tends to be a split.
Yeah, a lot of splinter groups.
Yeah.
Did you leave before Warren Jeffs went to prison, or was it
Oh
after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was,
okay.
Yeah.
Didn't play much role in your decision then.
So it did actually. So Rulon Jeffs was over the church from, I think it was like 1985 till 2002 when he died. Now, I believe it was in 1997, somewhere around there, Rulon Jeffs had a stroke. And ever since then, he was kind of I don't know if he was mentally incapacitated, but it really affected his health. And he could no longer run things like he did. And Rulon, or not Rulon, but his son Warren kind of took over and ran things in on his behalf. So anyway, so anywhere from 1997 till 2005, which was when I left, then everything just started getting more strict and more controlled, and just more fear. There was just a lot of fear. So,
what do you think brought about that? Why?
That's
just
a good question.
Standard. Yeah, I would love to know your understanding.
It's interesting. I didn't really have a lot of conversations with Warren Jeffs. I met him quite a few times, but it was mostly just in passing, like shaking his hand or, you know. So I knew him. I definitely knew him. I don't think he really knew me, but it's an interesting. He's an interesting case, I think, for a psychologist. You know, just because I think a lot of the decisions that he made were decisions based on fear, and they were decisions based on insecurity.
A lot of end time propaganda came out.
Right. Yeah.
Coming up, tried to predict the world's ending, like.
Right. And he used that. He knew that fear was a good motivator for people, and so he would use that to control people.
Did he act out of his own fear? Is that what you were saying to some extent?
Yeah, I think a lot of it. So I don't know if there's a really good book out there that would answer a lot of your questions, and it's called I know the lady. It's called The Woman, or The Lady Who Wore Red, or something like that. Let me see. But it's written by let me see, Rebecca Musser. The Lady Who Wore Red. Let's see. Anyway, it's a really good book out there, and if you want to get more of the inside story of what was going on with Rulon Jeffs and Warren Jeffs, you definitely need to read that book. I believe it's on Audible. It's a good audio book, and you can get a good insight onto what was going on.
I think I found. Is it The Witness Wore Red?
The Witness Wore Red. That's it. Yes.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's
she testified at Warren Jeffs' trial, and she was married to Rulon Jeffs, and so I believe she's about the same age as Warren, and so she's got a really good insight on what was going on.
Hell yeah, that's awesome.
And it's also from a woman's perspective, so you can kind of see the mentality
Yeah,
from a woman's perspective.
yeah, that's valuable. But we're trying to get I have a couple friends who escaped getting married to their uncles. Trying to get those women on these podcasts is that it's such a radical difference in perspective.
Right.
Even just basic Mormonism, such a wildly different experience from male to female.
Yeah.
Do you think that,
that
I was going to ask, like, do you think your ability to left was a little more like viewed by people higher in the hierarchy of the religion? Where
Yeah.
it's okay, like,
yeah,
okay, he's a man if he wants to leave.
Yeah, they you know, I believe around the time I left, even though I'd kind of made my decision, then there were a lot of young men who were being kicked out for really ridiculous reasons, and it's because, I mean, do the math. They wanted, some of the men who were in control wanted more younger wives, and the younger males are competition. So,
that's horrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's they probably didn't see it that way, but that's very common in human behavior, is where someone does something, or they justify their behavior through some kind of a logical process or whatever.
I hear that.
And especially when it comes to sexuality, because that's a very strong human that's a very strong part of the human experience, and people will justify themselves, like, take Warren Jeffs for example. He thought that it was okay to marry and have sex with a 12-year-old. I mean, and in his mind, he didn't do anything wrong because it was God's will. That's his logical process of justifying why it was okay to have sex with a 12-year-old. So
you can pick and choose what you want to do, and if you put that decision in a higher power, it's not your fault, right?
Right.
So Birdie again wants to ask, assuming there is one, which I don't know if there quite is, what is the process like for a woman to leave?
It's definitely harder, particularly because as a woman, you are a commodity in this particular cult.
Yeah.
And they were used like currency. And in hindsight, I remember probably around when I was 14, when I was starting to question a lot of things, there were girls who were getting married at 14 years old. And and so that's kind of one thing that I didn't really understand it until later on, till I had left the cult, that I was like, wow, these women were being used as currency. And so what they would do is patriarch in the society would be like, well, if you let me marry your daughter, then you can have one of my daughters type of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And it definitely wasn't publicized, and then it was kind of made official by the so-called prophet Warren Jeffs, or the leader of the church, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And who's to say that that didn't go on with, that's one way that these patriarchs in the church would gain favor with Warren Jeffs, is, you know, through their daughters. To me, it's sick, but like I said, they can justify their behavior somehow. So, but to answer the question, it's definitely harder for the woman, because they are a commodity. They're more valuable in the community than the young men are, and so they tend to exercise a lot more control over the women. That way, it's also, if you are familiar with the Mormon ideology, a woman cannot hold the priesthood, the Aaronic priesthood or the Melchizedek priesthood. And
yeah,
so
they have to be sealed to somebody that does.
Yeah, exactly. And so for a woman growing up in the society, saying, okay, well, the only way I'm going to be worth anything is if I marry a faithful priesthood man, right? And so growing up with that idea, I don't know, there's not very much empowerment in that thought.
Right.
You know, and so the women are inferior to men. It's just that simple. And, you know, especially if you're raised in a society where you think that the only way you can be worth anything is to marry, you know, someone who holds a priesthood. So it's a lot more controlling environment, or a lot more controlled environment for the women than it is the men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So looking back at it now, would you say it is more of a religious cult or a sexual cult?
It's definitely more of a religious cult, even though there is a lot of I think there's a lot of sexual abuse
Mm-hmm.
in these cults, and they justify it through religion, through their faith. But I believe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe one reason for the sexual abuse is because they do not, well, within a religion, sex is considered taboo, you
Yeah.
know, growing up. And from a parental standpoint, I can understand that. I mean, you don't want to, you know, be raising your kids thinking it's okay to be, you know, uh, playing mommy and daddy, whatever, you know. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely some reason for it, but to suppress your sexuality to a point to where, you know, especially as young humans, that's what kids do. They explore their bodies, you know, they're curious with, you know, their sexuality. And to suppress that, I believe that's one of the main reasons for the sexual abuse in these cults, or in these religious cults, I should say,
That makes sense.
is because it's suppressed to a point to where now it manifests in these horrible ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that makes a lot of sense actually. If you like
Yeah.
suppress it enough, they're gonna just come out
And
later.
maybe, yeah, like I don't know. I don't have any kids of my own, and who am I to say how to raise kids on sexuality? But I would think that there's a way to address sexuality that isn't, if you address it with your kids in a way that doesn't convey that it's wrong that you have sexual urges, you know, if you convey it that, hey, this is part of being human, this is part of your life,
Yeah.
and to address it in a way that you know, it can be a very useful tool, um, namely procreation. You know, it's, you know, but you know, use it wisely. I don't know if you're familiar with the book called Think and Grow Rich.
I'm not.
Well, anyway, it's very common in business, particularly business in Utah. There's a lot of businesses in Utah called Think and Grow, or that use the book Think and Grow Rich. It's by Napoleon Hill.
Okay.
Well, in the book, he talks about sexual transmutation, and without getting too cultish on this ideology, because you know, any, whether it be a book or whatever, can become a cult. But in the book, he talks about using your sexual urges as a form of transformation. You know, well, transformation of what? Well, I would say discipline, you know,
Mm.
to exercise more discipline. And I think that's kind of the answer when it comes to sexuality is you know, it's okay to me, sure, every guy's going to masturbate, every guy, woman, whatever, you know, I think it's part of being human.
Yeah.
But to use that energy in a way that's destructive, you know, and to have the discernment, to have the judgment of, okay, am I using this energy in a destructive way, or is it more of like a recreational way, or a means of release? You know, I mean, it's an interesting subject for me, and maybe I'm speaking, you know, from my own sexually suppressed past, but you know, it's an interesting subject for me all the time, and that's kind of a where I've come from. I kind of tend to deviate from the question. I don't know if I answered the question.
You're not alone, man. You did a good job. Also, fucking, that's what I think about quite often, dude. The sexual repression is tangible here in Utah. It's crazy. It's
Yeah.
so.
Well, it's a little off topic, but if you look at like Ted Bundy, for example, like dude was incredibly sexually oppressed,
Right.
and to even to like the time of his um like in prison before he was actually put down, he blamed like pornography for his abuse, not the fact that like because
Yeah.
he still viewed that in his head as like this horrible thing, rather than the fact that like he was just playing out his disgusting desires.
Right.
So if you again you put somebody like that in power.
Yeah. It's really interesting. There's a, not to deviate too much, but I think when it comes, there's a confusion that occurs, I think, in the psyche and your mind when it comes to sexuality, and that's um, particularly with men, because men tend to be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to sexuality, and it's almost like their empathy kind of shuts off, and and this is how some of these, you know, people like Ted Bundy did what they did, is, you know, they had this very aggressive, suppressed social or sexual desire, and it manifested in a way that was destructive, and it just completely shut down the part of his psyche that was of what we call empathy. So anyway.
That's well put. I got a question for you, man. Did you have any leaders? Was there like a systematic structure of indoctrination, like a schooling, Sunday schooling? And if you had any leaders, kind of feedback do you have about them? Were any ones that were good? Did you learn anything profitable from your experience, or was it problematic?
Yeah. Well, like I'm not really ashamed of anything in my past. Actually, I've been very fortunate that I've had, a good family. My dad was a very good dad, in my opinion. He was always around. He would do things with his children, and I just had I don't know. I enjoyed my childhood, even though as I got older, things started to get a lot stranger. And maybe I ought to touch on some of that past. Back in the 70s and 80s, or I should say anywhere from where the FLDS started, which was back in 1890 when the main Mormons decided not to practice polygamy, there was very little difference between FLDS and LDS. And then as over the years, and I think somewhere back in the 80s is when it really started to polarize. You could really just the ideology and the FLDS and the LDS really started to polarize, and there was a big difference between LDS and FLDS.
Mm-hmm.
Where was I going with that? Well, anyway. Oh, sorry.
We're
Yeah,
talking
yeah. So I had a really good family growing up. There were some men in the community that I admired and that I looked up to, and one of them was actually my great uncle, I guess you could say. Let's see, it's like my grandfather's brother or uncle or something like that. Anyway, he's a really old guy. He was the bishop of the community, and I always thought that he was really wise, and uh, he definitely cared for the people, and he tried to take care of the people as much as he could. He was more community oriented, whereas Warren and Rulin were a lot more self oriented. They were more interested in themselves. And anyway, it wasn't until later that I found out that he wasn't as admirable as I was raised to believe, but still you could just tell through his actions that he was a very wise leader in the community, and you know he would take care of like um, some of the families in the community. Um, you know, since he was a bishop, then he would financially take care of some of the families and stuff. So anyway,
Okay.
but yeah, there was a lot of good. I think there were a lot of really good men in that community, and who did have, they didn't try to control the women as much as other men, and I think my dad was one of them. My dad, actually, when some of my sisters left the community, my dad actually took them to, let's see, one of my younger sisters, I believe he took her to Cedar City because her friend lived there or something, and she said she no longer wanted to be a part of the organization. And so my dad was like, okay, where do you want to go? Because you can't stay here.
Mm.
And she was like, well, my friend's in Cedar. And he's like, okay, I'll take you there. And so he was completely supportive of my sister's decision, even though it was really painful for him, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why he was excommunicated and kicked out, is that he wouldn't play along with the currency of women. He wouldn't use his daughters to, try and get a younger wife or whatever. So yeah.
Gotta respect that. Yeah, things aren't always so black and white, and I'm glad you kind of touched on that, because we like to touch on the fact that, like, when we left the LES religion, there was a loss of community. It's
Right.
still like weird to talk about like that kind of stuff with family. but typically, like, looking at somebody else's like ideals, like, you typically are going to associate it with nothing but the bad, right? But there's,
Uh-huh.
I mean, everybody loses something when they leave that, because there was something there to be lost.
There's a
Right.
reason why people do it too in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is, yeah. And I will say that as well. That's part of what gave me a lot of anxiety and vulnerability coming out of it, was because there was definitely that loss of community. And that's what I really admire about a lot of the Utah culture, is that it's so family and community oriented, and you have this really strong support group.
Yeah, it can
And
be.
that's actually pretty common in cults, is there's a strong sense of community,
Yeah.
you know, and people want to belong to something, and that's natural. And it's definitely hard to come out of such a support group and kind of be on your own, and you kind of feel, especially if you're shunned in any way, so
Yeah. Do you find yourself a part of support groups on the opposite end of the spectrum now? Do you affiliate with ex-Mormon groups at all?
Not really.
No
I get,
respect.
yeah, I haven't really joined any kind of group. I haven't really joined any other religion. Mostly just because I think, if I don't know, I tend to kind of be a loner on a lot of things. I like to, I don't know, like, kind of a do-it-yourself type of guy, and which, I don't know. I guess the reason I'm that way is because I get a lot of a better sense of accomplishment or something. I don't know, but I think it would definitely help if I would get into some groups, and maybe I can offer help, or or I don't know. I've never really joined any other group. I've definitely gone to a couple of LDS churches after I left the FLDS.
How was that? What was that like?
It was familiar.
Familiar.
Yeah, it was. Um, I didn't mind it. Um, the reason, or I didn't, I could see a lot of similarities, and so I was like, well, it's great, and that's what I love about the Mormon Church, is that it's such a strong sense of community, and I think it's great to band together and help each other out, things like that. And I definitely I wanted to be a part of a lot of that. The problem is I didn't want to start going to church and then have them, start wanting me to be baptized and be ordained into the priesthood and all this. I didn't want to do that, but I definitely wanted to be a part of the support group. And so I decided that it was better that I not be a part of that, so that the members in that group wouldn't start to expect that I get baptized. And in other words, I didn't want to just take and take and take from that community if I wasn't going to be a contributing member of it. I didn't want to contribute to it, but I definitely wanted to be a part of the support that it gave. And so I decided just not to do it at all, because I didn't want to just take and take and take from that community.
100%. You mentioned you got into spirituality to some extent. You hinted at Buddhism. That's something that I experienced after going through about 3 or 4 years of militant atheism after leaving Mormonism. Can you talk about that transition for yourself? Did you spend some time not believing in God, or what made you want to come back?
Yeah. That just yeah. So it really kind of started. Let's see. It's about 2 years, two or 3 years after I had finally made this decision to leave that cult. So 3 years after I'd left the cult, I had realized, or I was just kind of going about life, and it might sound funny, and it is kind of funny, but I came across that film, The Secret. I don't know if you've heard of it, where they
Yeah.
talk about the law of
Yeah.
attraction, all that. Well, that really woke me up. I mean, I kind of adopt that philosophy to some degree. I think that there's definitely the law of attraction, or, you know, you attract who you are, or whatever, whatever that is. It really started to ring true with me. And it made me realize that I'm responsible for my own salvation, if you will. And that's kind of what that experience gave me was, you attract what you want, you're responsible for your life. And I just remember in my upbringing, then they had this belief or this teaching that was, we're here to learn who God is and how to become like him. Well, this was the day that I found out. Excuse me.
You take your time.
This was the day that I found out who God was, or who God is, and I found that was me.
So the fuck is that, dude?
I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
And not only was it me, but it was everybody else too. And so it wasn't that I was this all-powerful being, but that I realized that I had the potential. I had the seed of enlightenment, if you will, we come from a Buddhist standpoint. I had the potential to be, what I was looking for.
Absolutely.
Fuck yeah, dude.
And so, and like I said, I kind of circle back to where, if God's this all wise and powerful being, why would he I look at it this way. A human, a mother and a father, they have a kid, and this kid is a human. This kid grows up, and guess what? He does full-grown human stuff. And it's the same thing with us. We're like godlings. We are born on this physical earthly plane, if you will. This is probably a lot. It sounds familiar with a lot of the Mormon ideology, and this is something that I've kind of kept with me that's kind of stuck. And going back to my belief that to learn who God is and how to become like him, well, it's not really him or her. It's I know who God is, and that's me, and that's you, and that's every person on this planet. And so
100%.
it not only did it give me a large sense, or a lot of self-respect for me, but it gave me a lot of respect for other people too.
Oh yeah.
And so it's one of those things that I feel, I don't know how to put it into words exactly, but it's just a big part of who I am today. And
awesome.
and if you read the book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, then he talks about this. It's called ineffable. In other words, you can't explain it. It's an ineffable reality. And And so, and part of it is that you don't need to explain it. You know, that's kind of how cults start, is you try to explain something and you begin to conceptualize a thought, and then that thought gets taken too seriously. You know, that mindset gets taken too seriously. And so that's kind of been a practice for me in meditation, is I don't really take my thoughts too seriously. So anyway.
Dude, that's what's up. Honestly, I'm so grateful for the feedback. I've been trying to seriously. I'm trying to advocate to my friends who have left religion in explosive fashions. There's a lot of polarizing communities in this area. Fucking people leave and they start blowing people up on Facebook, start
Right.
militantly attacking other people's beliefs. I'm trying to advocate that you can still entertain spirituality, and that
Right.
spirituality, right, may be a personal thing, like person to person. It might be, honestly, you described it best. The thing that I found resonance in is that we're all the same. We're all like all the collective parts of the universe add up to what I perceive
Right.
as one entity, and that being all of us are an expression of
Right.
infinite potential, right?
Yeah.
So I
I
fucking
mean, it's
appreciate that.
it's huge, and like I said, you can't explain it. The moment you
Yeah,
try to explain it, that's how religions start. Is they're trying to conceptualize this thing that can't be explained.
very
You
well
know.
put. I thought that was super cool. He said that.
Yeah.
I identify a little bit with Taoistic Buddhism, the idea that if you try to explain the Tao, then it's not the Tao. Like,
Absolutely.
uh,
That's another great, really great read. If you're in the books, that's another really good book, is the Tao Te Ching.
that's what's up. You're a cat. You're okay.
And like I said, I mean, again, you have to be careful. At least in my mind, I try to be careful because, again, the Tao Te Ching, what is that? That's a concept. It's another conceptualization of something. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not gonna be true. Yeah, those are good values, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Do you have any kind of community where you can share these values with? Do you have someone who's on the spiritual path with you, or is this something that you do personally?
Um, it's kind of been on my own, but I really appreciate being on here, and if there are people who listen to this to get some kind of orientation, if you're a ex-Mormon, if you will, there's nothing to be ashamed of that. I think it's a normal process that goes on with humans. For example, let's take some of your ancestors. Like some of these people, like I mentioned, I was probably fourth or fifth generation Mormon. My ancestors probably went through the same thing when they converted to Mormonism, you know. So I think it's normal. I think what's important is that, um, like I said, don't take thoughts too seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously, or any kind of concept or idea too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but embrace your past, embrace what you've been through or what you're going through. I think it's all for the better, and I always operate on the premise of, it's not what happens to you that defines you, but your reaction to what happens to you. What do you do with what's handed to you?
Yeah, I think that's great.
So
100%.
Great feedback.
anyway, but yeah, like um, definitely come on this podcast again. I think it's great that if you're trying to offer a support group for people who are trying to come out of Mormonism, I don't think it's bad to be in Mormonism.
Yeah,
You know,
my
I you know
my main thing I'm trying to break down and get across is to break down your dogmas, understand why you believe the things that you believe,
right, yeah,
and and think critically of things. If as long as people are thinking critically, as long as they're actively seeking knowledge with the intent that they want to know as many true things as possible, and disregard all as many false things that they've been either raised with or believe. That's one thing I'm trying to get across.
Yeah.
And wherever that
yeah.
leads you, I mean,
more or less, our goal is to provide that community for the people who are transitioning out. I mean, to the best of our abilities online.
Yeah.
We still want that community, because that community is nice. It is nice to have people you can go to for support, and we're trying to build that.
Yeah. It's. I'm just going back to the question of what did I do when I came out of there. I think I might have had a support group, but I don't know. It was interesting. I guess you could say, I want to say I figured things out on my own, but I don't think it was all me. I think I definitely had some help figuring things out, and the story's not over. I mean, who's to say that later on I find a deep meaning in the Mormon Church? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. I'd like to be a lot more present. I'm not worried about my future. I embrace my past. It's made me who I am today. I'm proud that my ancestors were Mormon. I think it's a great there's such great stories in the Mormon faith and in the Mormon culture. There's some really good things that can be learned from the church, even though I don't follow them and I don't claim to be affiliated with any organized religion or ideology. I tend to be a big fan of logic and reasoning. So
absolutely.
I think it's always important to keep in mind, like, not necessarily being like staunch in any particular idea. Like, if something were to come out of the church that were compelling enough, if I think a substantial claim requires some kind of substantial evidence. But if something were large enough to come out to convince me, I want to make sure that I'm in a position where I'm thinking critically, of course, but able to teeter one way or another. I don't think there's any shame in that. I don't think that it's problematic to think that if something is true, that you should be seeking it. That's kind of where I fell apart. That's where I kind of fell out, is that I didn't think that these things were meeting those standards of evidence that I had. So I fell away from it. And
there's nothing to be ashamed of, even though you have people who shun you. Like I had family members, God, my mom's still not talking to me. I think subconsciously she wants to, but she's too afraid of, what will God think or whatever,
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with, rebellion, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's, like, I don't know. I've always had the attitude that, if it doesn't seem like the attitude and the what do you want to, the behavior of a superior being to be so judgmental that you left a particular religion,
exactly. If this thing knew everything, it would know exactly what it needs to convince me.
Right.
Getting this information. So,
and that's my view on all of this. Is if there's a God, as long as you're a decent person, he doesn't care. I don't think you need to identify with a religion. As long as you're not out there killing people or being a piece of shit, you're fine.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and generally that's, like, the moment you do go out and harm others or whatever, harm the planet, whatever, you know, there's a big disconnect there. You know, there's a big, like, you don't see, like what I was saying, where not only am I God, but so is everyone else. And you don't see that connection. There's no respect for others, you know?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys having me on. I don't know if you're trying to wrap it up, but you know, I can definitely hang out longer if you want.
Does anyone have any more questions?
If anybody has questions they want to
chat
touch on.
If anyone in chat has questions, now would be a great time.
I at the very least have some feedback. I just wanted to say, you're doing great. Like, you seem incredible. Yeah. I can't speculate. I don't know you, but it's been a pleasure talking.
Well, if you guys are in Utah here, we should meet up sometime. And you know, if I need help or if I can be of help, then I'll definitely, you know, help. Like I said, I tend to be a loner, and you know, but not. I don't know. I shouldn't be.
Yeah, we hear that.
You know, I'm not like antisocial or anything. I don't know. I spend a lot of. I'm one of those people who, you know, if I'm with friends, I'm with friends. If I'm alone, I'm alone, and I don't mind. It doesn't bother me to be alone. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
100%. Well, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this. We're in the same boat, and this was an attempt to create a platform that we can also meet other people who are like us. Let's definitely meet up.
And I think that's awesome. Like that's incredible. Like that's something that I, you know, I probably should have done or something. I don't know. And the other part of me, that's one reason probably why I tend to be a loner, is I try not to push my own views and my own ideology onto other people. You know.
Yeah.
I try to be of help where I can, but I don't like force things onto people. So
that's a good thing to be, yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes it can be very difficult to not push your views. You got to find that fine balance between pushing it and putting it out there to hopefully influence or give them at least something to think about.
Right.
I guess not influence, but.
So I guess the question I have is what is it? There's something that any of you guys are struggling with as far as, you know, coming out of Mormonism? Like, you know,
shit.
It's been long enough that I think I've put a lot of that behind me.
Right.
I mean, still, like, to this day though, I'm like, I'll put this cast like on my own personal Facebook because I've got a lot of friends that may have interest in what we have to say, but I still, to this day, I'm like going out of my way to exclude like family members that I'm like, they're gonna come in here and it's gonna come up on like Sunday dinner, you know. So
yeah,
that sense of loss of community is still somewhat there, but
yeah,
I think I've got my own community, and I'd rather I'd have people like me for who I actually am rather than pretend to be what they want me to be. So
right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what's awesome, and that's what I, you know, just talking to you guys, there's definitely a sense of authenticity, and that's a word that I really love. I like to operate from a place of authenticity.
Yeah,
so
100%. Dude, the biggest thing out of religion that are things that you've already hit, archetypes you already hit, or already discussed. Frankly, the existential crisis is still a bit imminent in my life, and it incentivizes me to be really invested in occulted literature, reading about other people's religions. There's still deep rooted cognition in my brain that's revolving around hidden documents and sacred books and shit like that. So what we're doing here is effectively helping me, giving us a chance to talk about it.
Well, that's good. Yeah. Awesome. Actually, my brother, it's funny, my brother's Mormon. So this is the brother that I stayed with in St. George when I left the cult. He's actually Mormon now. He married this girl from Southern California. She was Mormon, and I guess he married her, and and now they were married in the temple and all this. And I just find it ironic that he came out of a Mormon cult. And I mean, I don't know. I think it happens with a lot of FLDS, actually, just because it's familiar.
Yeah. Understandable.
Yeah, but and I don't to go from one religion into another and go through that processes where your entire belief system is just restructured and reevaluated is a hell of a process in my mind. And I have a lot more respect for people who, even though they end up in a religion that I don't adopt or affiliate with. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I have a lot of respect for people who go through that process. So
yeah, well, it takes a lot to kind of question everything, because it's not always just a matter of, oh, my family, my friends, they're gonna think this way. It's questioning your eternity sometimes, if you truly have those grounded beliefs. And I think it takes a lot to be able to question that and to come to an answer where you're willing to, in a sense, gamble with it. So I do respect that a lot.
Yeah.
Same to you. Dude, I also wanted to say, like, props to you for starting to recognize where your values weren't being met in the organization that you're in at such a young age.
Absolutely.
It took me, like 5, 6 years old. Seriously, it took me till I was like 18 to get my head around the idea that, like, maybe I shouldn't be doing these things or adhering to the system.
For real.
Well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying is that in my mind, Mormonism, the LDS church, is a much more milder, it's more calmer form of the FLDS. And so, the FLDS was a very potent cult experience for me, whereas people who are in the LDS culture, it's a lot more gradual. And so you'll come out of it gradually, and that's why it's taken it. You're like what you're saying, where you come out at like 18 or whatever. For me, it was a lot earlier.
Yeah.
That's well put.
So
if you don't have that eminent reason to run from it, then it might not spur that.
There's no motivation. That's why a lot of these people, I know several FLDS members who were sexually abused, and they just flipped 180. Like, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. And there was a reason for that. It's because there was some kind of trauma that was behind their decision. Whereas if there's, a lot of where you're just like, this doesn't really match reality, and you're starting to question things, that process tends to be a lot more gradual. So and who knows, I mean, maybe that process it could have the opposite effect, where you're questioning everything and you actually end up becoming even more entrenched in the belief. I mean, it goes both ways.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You gotta give people the tools to kind of make those decisions. Like, a lot of it falls on the ethical line, and what is and isn't ethical. A lot of that's subjective. It's not always so black and white. So if this is true, it's got to be like the most true version of itself. Therefore, I've got to go deeper and deeper and deeper. What were the original teachings of this thing? Because it has to be true. You bend logic around a predisposed decision that was made, or convinced decision that was made to state that something is true. So you have to dive in 110%. So
well put.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you allow cursing, or I just knew I swore a couple times in there, but I just wanted to make sure I was okay there.
This is one of the more tame episodes we've had, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome. No. Yeah. Like, I mean, I see it as part of the process. If people come out of Mormonism or any kind of cult, and there's just like this anger this bitterness or,
Oh, yeah.
that's part of it. Because I definitely went through that to where I was just kind of angry at, I was angry at people for their ignorance,
Yeah.
and now I've just like kind of calmed down and, it's all part of the process. So
Yeah, we'll go through that stage where you just learn something new and you got to tell everybody.
Yeah.
Figure out, like, Grandpa, don't you know that,
Yeah,
this and that's wrong? Like, why this? Try to get people to follow suit, but sometimes you just gotta let everybody figure it out.
I think the part that's angering is like once you get out and get an objective look at it, it becomes so clear.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're like, why don't you guys see this? Like, I can't be the only one.
That's definitely true. I remember that because, you don't realize you're in a cult until you leave it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, because if you did, you probably wouldn't be it to begin with, unless you're leading it. Yeah, it's all just a matter of convincing people that what they're doing is right and to not question it. Limit that information, like you mentioned, the media. Limit that ability to think critically or question it, and then if people are questioning it, fucking get rid of them. They're out. And don't talk to them ever again, because
it's
all about control.
Yeah, any kind of, and that's a really big red flag is if the operating authority is threatened by any kind of challenge or any kind of, then that's a big red flag.
100%.
Yeah, for sure.
How prominent was Masonry? Did you, in the FLDS church, did you end up seeing anything in retrospect, or did you conscious of that?
You're talking about Freemasonry, I assume, or what we know as Freemasonry.
That's correct. Yeah.
I didn't really know very much about Freemasonry until after I had left the church, and I was kind of questioning everything. I was evaluating everything and just like looking at it from the outside in, at the FLDS from the outside in. And I was like, and then I start talking with other people, just kind of like what you're doing here. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, wow, oh, that's right. Okay, so 1805, which was or early 1800s, which was Joseph Smith's time, there was just this huge religious, proliferation. And Freemasonry, I think, has a lot of influence on Mormonism.
Absolutely.
A lot of rituals taken from it, for sure.
Yeah, and actually, let me just clarify. So when I was raised in the FLDS, we didn't have any kind of temple practices or anything like that. We didn't have a temple. Now, it wasn't until later, after I had left, then they had that raid in Texas on Warren Jeff's property there in Texas, where they had you can see images of it, that FLDS temple that was there. And that was a couple of years after I had left. So I never really am that familiar with the Mormon practices in the temple. So
that makes sense.
But
I was just wondering. My ignorance knows no bounds. I don't know much about the Masonry, but I wish I did. Wish I understood its influence.
Well, my understanding, or like I said, I'm not that familiar with the LDS culture when it comes to the temple, but my understanding is that they have like aprons and special handshakes and stuff, and that's definitely along the lines of Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. There's a video that we refer to a lot, of some like the ceilings with the veil. Handshakes that come out. There's videos that were
the chanting.
Shared.
God bless the guy that snuck a camera into the temple.
God bless him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's what
oh, really? So there's a video of stuff in the Mormon temple.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's like we can link that to you
after this, for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, like like I said, I'm not like bitter towards the Mormons or anything. I find it interesting, and like I don't condemn Mormons at all. I don't, I work with a bunch of Mormons, and I don't know. I see it as part of being human. I think it's part of being human where you get caught up in ideology or some kind of ideology, and a Mormon would probably say that I'm caught up in a cult. I don't know. So,
That's really good. That's really well put.
But I definitely like to look at things from a point of curiosity, like,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd like to see that video. I mean, I know the Mormons probably wouldn't like me to watch it, but
yeah, they're not too happy about it for sure. I think you have great values, and I think it's something that I came a little bit late to to say the least. Fuck, dude. I think the majority of people's militants, or the majority of the reason why people flip to the opposite end of the spectrum so aggressively when leaving an establishment, a cult organization, is because of pain. It's because of fear.
Yeah.
Right. They want other people not to experience the mistakes they did, to feel the way they did. So they end up projecting that. I'm speaking about myself. The moment I accepted what had happened, the money I had given to Mormonism, all these factors, is the moment I stopped resenting other people for participating.
Right.
What do you think about that? Was there, how much of an acceptance process was there coming outside of the FLDS church?
It definitely took a while. Like I can't tell you not to be, not to have that anger or that, I know what you're talking about. But it definitely took me a while. I remember, I think it was probably less than 5 years ago. I kind of got over this, this, what do you call it? I kind of want to call it anger, but I think it's just more of like just this irritation that people could be so ignorant, know.
Yeah.
And then I just realized, you know what? They're human just like me, and I may have gone through a different process, or maybe I'm on a similar process. I don't know, So like I said, I'm just kind of in this space of like, now I'm just curious. So, but yeah, like I said, if people are struggling with this, there's just like irritation that really bugs you about how it's almost like I don't know if it's like it feels like you've been lied to your whole life, or maybe it's like, for me, it was just like, I can't believe these people are so ignorant, or they're so blind, to this belief system that's like completely bullshit in my mind now. I mean, it's just like, but I mean, it's definitely healthy to have these arguments, if you will, on your belief system, and to challenge everything that you believe in by all means, challenge everything you believe in.
Yeah.
And if I was to come from a biased standpoint, that's exactly what the Buddha said. When Buddha had his disciples and all this, he told his followers, he's like, challenge everything I say. He's like, if there's something that doesn't match, you have the right to discard it. You have the right to challenge it and get rid of it. And by all means, if you don't find any value in what I teach, by all means, leave it,
Yeah,
so,
awesome.
Yeah,
but I think it's valuable input, valuable information today.
So I want to touch back on the feelings coming out of the church. I think there's a lot of guilt involved too. Like you feel guilty for letting yourself being taken advantage of or believing that for so long, like not seeing it objectively sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I can see, I could see how, especially if you have loved ones, family members, or somebody who is like urging you, like I'm just saying, if you were still a member in the church and you have somebody who's not affiliated with the church anymore, who's urging you to leave and all this, and then you finally come around and you're like, I'm sorry, I was so blind, or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But if there's that guilt, like I said, don't be ashamed of it. I think everything comes in its due time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just part of being human,
It's very
but
true.
I didn't really feel guilty. For a while there, I thought I was like so smart and so, like I'd been through this traumatic cult and I had survived, come out of this traumatic cult, and it really wasn't that traumatic for me. And I thought I was just this really smart person, and I knew everything, and I was so spiritual and self-righteous, and I just came around and realized, you know what, I'm trying to figure out life just like everybody else is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you figure it out, is you question everything.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think you were incredibly fortunate with your story with leaving.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, not everybody's so lucky. There's a lot of people that leave even just the mainstream LDS church that have they've had harsh experience leaving their family. I think we speak on this a lot. Shock conversion therapy was only just made illegal for children or minors. What was it?
December.
Yeah, 2 months ago.
Last year.
And there's still like plenty of...
What? So
yeah.
the church is authorizing shock treatment
for children. They were up until December. They still...
Yeah, they were up until this last year.
They still offer it for adults.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I had no idea. Huh.
Yeah, it's still very much in practice for adults. Shocking the gay out of people is very common.
It's not just that. They see that as like the overall cure for anything. Because any mental disorder or idea that you have, they'll just shock it out of you. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Which I think we all know doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, it's curious because I'm like, how does somebody think that way? I don't know. I'm kind of a psychologist now because I'm always like analyzing like because I'm a big fan of like human behavior. I study human behavior a lot, particularly capitalism. Like if you want to understand economics, just study human behavior and you'll get it right away.
Kind of get a gist of
But
it.
But anyways, but it's interesting because I'd imagine that from a religious leader standpoint, they probably think that you're under some kind of influence from Satan or something.
Yeah.
And they're going to shock it out of you, or they give you a blessing or whatever. I don't know. It's interesting how somebody thinks that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of like old doctrines referring to disease, whether it be like a disease like a virus or bacterial, to mental disorders as demons. So there's a lot of people that still kind of abide by some, maybe not like the literal sense in the words, but something along those lines. Like, well, you must have done something to deserve it, right? Like you must have opened your heart to to that, and that's why they do. That's why there's a lot of like blessings involved when people get sick using the concentrated oils. Blessings from people in the priesthood, because to some extent they do still believe that it's the devil's work.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll definitely have to meet up with you guys. You guys got a lot of cool stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, we would love to have you on again. For sure.
One of these.
Yeah.
Thanks for being patient with us. I don't know if we're the best interviews.
No, it's interesting. I think we're all kind of in the same boat. Like, I'm fascinated with the whole subject, and I don't know if you guys are like still working through coming out of the Mormon culture or what, but or maybe a lot of your followers are. I don't know, but I'd definitely like to meet up with you guys sometime, and maybe it's on here, or if you guys are in Utah, like somebody was drinking a coffee from a Sunset Coffee place that I like to go frequently. So
that's what all of us. We're all roommates in the same place, so we're all here
awesome.
in the valley. So
cool. Well, right on.
We should absolutely meet up sometime.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
I agree.
Cool.
That'd be super helpful.
All right. Well,
I think we should. We're about 2 hours in now. An hour and 50. I think we should probably call it.
Start wrapping up here. Just want to touch on. I think we're gonna make this somewhat a two-parter. We wanted to go over like the history, Warren trial. I know Mel did a lot of research on.
She's got a 4-page little summary here.
Touch on that.
It's just up. Yeah, I think we hit that up next week, right?
Yep.
Yeah. We're gonna do Sunday. Okay, that works.
So next week we'll have just a brief summary. If 2 hours is brief.
Yeah, right. We wanted to get some insight before going into it too much on somebody with first-hand experience, so that way when we touch on everything, it's not as like we're not as ignorant to the topic. We have a little bit more to offer. So
100%.
Definitely appreciate the insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you so much.
And just let me know if you want to have me on again, or if anybody has any questions, then you know.
We'll do.
We'll do.
Stay communicado.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For
sure. Yeah, seriously appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
Hell yeah, you guys.
Okay, right. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
All right. Good, man.
You bet. We'll see you. Bye.
Well,
best podcast ever.
That was really good.
Yeah, that was very, very good.
All right, stream. We're gonna call it here. If you are interested in part 2, where we talk more facts, we just follow through. We're just really gonna read off a bunch of bullet points here. We're gonna go over from when Warren Jeffs took over as the prophet to when he was arrested. Mel did a great job of pulling up a ton of information. We'll probably skim over that. We just briefly talk about it, but next Sunday, 2:00.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah, FLDS continues.
So if you're interested in hearing that, don't forget to follow.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, too.
A lot of stuff to go over.
A lot of stuff.
It's truth. And things are getting exciting, too. A fucking homeboy in chat messaged me via Facebook. I don't know if you guys saw that, but he grew up he didn't grow up. He was homeless, and he was forced into a sex cult of sorts.
Yeah, I sort of saw that. If you are able to get in contact with him, love to hear his story.
Yeah, awesome.
I'd love to get that feedback.
Especially in Utah, so close to home.
Yeah, only in Utah, bro. God damn it, dude.
All right, guys. We're out of here.
All right.
Take it easy, guys.
Don't forget to pay your tithing.